Well, you only live once, maybe not. And this life right now might be all we've got. So let's contemplate the hereafter while we speculate with some laughter about this grim thing that happens to us all after that final curtain call. But before you take that final breath, let's laugh about.
Welcome to Let's Laugh About Death, the dramedy podcast that celebrates life while contemplating the inevitable. I'm your host, Tim Rooney, and this episode's going to be a little bit different. My voice is going to squeak, and I'm going to leave it in there. Why? Because it's organic. Inside joke. You know, in inside jokes, I'm going to get on a topic about that here. Something occurred to me today, just while recording this, in fact, because this is like the 14th take. I realize that there are people in your life that you haven't talked to in forever, but you can call them up after 2-3 years and it's like you talked yesterday. I've got people like that in my life. Most people do, you know, and hopefully you do. I feel bad if you don't. But, you know, unfortunately, sometimes those people go away. Sometimes it's good reasons. Sometimes it's bad reasons. You know, it's one of those things. It's part of life. But if you do have somebody like that in your life that you can talk to and get back to those inside jokes and find all those goofy little things that you always used to giggle at that nobody else would get except the two of you, I recommend reaching out to them. This episode comes out on Labor Day, and it's a 3-day weekend. And of course, it comes out on the 3rd day of the 3-day weekend. But you know what? If you get this episode early enough, give somebody a call. Most of us are off on that day, or at least a good number of us are. Maybe they are. If not, I challenge you to try and reach out to somebody like that, you know, sometime during the week and just reconnect. Send them a text message so they don't get weirded out with you calling at 2 a.m. But, you know, and try not to be drunk when you do it. But I definitely recommend giving them a call because it'll make your life a little bit happier. It'll make their life a little bit happier, you know. So anyway, my episode today is a little bit different. I kind of screwed the format up a little bit because usually I give an intro of what we talk about a bit or, you know, just get into what the episode is kind of about, almost like a teaser, if you will. But yeah, I did all that stuff during the recording of the episode itself while the guy was on the phone. And yeah, the guy I'm talking to, I got to know better through this episode. He's actually a friend of one of the people that their passing caused me to decide to do this podcast. As a lot of you know, if you've been listening, I had several deaths all within a short amount of time. And it got me to thinking about doing this podcast. But yeah, anyway, my conversation with Mike Westendorf is pretty interesting. It's a very James-centric conversation. And James is that friend that was, you know, his friend as well as my friend. But, you know, again, we get into that. But we never met. We met at James's funeral. So I get into that a little bit more in the conversation. But what's interesting about Mike Westendorf and I is he's very much an intellectual, just like James was. And we talk about different concepts of the afterlife. You know, and I give him things to ponder, and he gives me things to ponder. And it was a really great conversation. So here's my conversation with Mike Westendorf. Hello. Hey, Mike, it's Tim.
Hey, Tim. How are you, sir?
Hey, pretty good, man. How you been?
Good.
Good. Yeah, I'm already recording, so I figured I'd just get this thing going off with a bang.
Who is this?
Really?
I'm kidding.
You had me going. I'm like, holy shit. Well, admittedly,
I was wondering.
Huh?
I was wondering if you were going to remember.
No, I've got it remembered. I just I was a minute late. I was actually wrapping up on a different episode, so I figured, you know what, I'm gonna. Hell, we both knew James. James wasn't always the most punctual guy, so he'll be okay if I'm a minute or two late.
Were you editing or were you recording?
I was doing like some intros and outros and stuff from the other episodes. So
okay.
Yeah. I was just getting it all wrapped up, publishing it on Mondays. So you know.
Can you hear me okay? Audio is good?
Audio seems to be okay. Yeah, not too bad.
Okay.
And we can always adjust it later. As long as it's clean, I can adjust it later. We'll cut all this garbage out here. So, so yeah. How you been, man?
Good.
Good. Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, give a little bit of background. But what's interesting, sure. I just want to say this here. What's interesting is Mike and I actually met through a mutual friend, his passing, and that was our friend James. And he'll probably come up a few times in this episode. But I know I've mentioned James in the past. James is one of the people that really got me starting doing this podcast. So. That's, his passing, and of course, shortly after that, a mutual friend of James and I, his passing, and then, of course, a brother a month after that. So it was a 3 in a row for me there, and kind of got me going on this. So for those of you who don't know who James is, he's our mutual friend, and it's interesting because Mike and I really only met there at his funeral. So, God, that almost sounded like more of an intro.
Well, it is, and it's one of the things I thought was most interesting about the podcast in terms of me being on it is that we met through death.
We met through death. Yeah. That's
so, and he, as far as I know, you were one of his best friends, if not his best friend. And so you came up every now and then. It's just, there was no, I want to say there was no reason to meet you, but it was just,
I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, you came
obviously
up a lot,
there was
too.
a big reason when he died.
Absolutely.
But you ended up turning out to be an awesome guy, and of course, no wonder he was friends with you. And so, and so that's kind of how we got together.
And I appreciate that. And and we've hung out a couple times, but I moved shortly after that, so it wasn't really much opportunity for that. But in some regards, I kind of wish the three of us had hung out because I think we would have had some great conversations.
That is very true. I share the same sentiment as well.
Yeah, that's but to kind of give an idea, with Mike, you were kind of, I always got the impression that you were kind of like the other man, if you will, where it's like, James would talk about you.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun, but it's interesting because we're going to be able to discuss. There is, of course, a topic that you brought up through email that I really want to get into, but on a short basis, just talking about the fascinating thing of you knew a different James than I did, and that's kind of wild. I mean, there was definitely, I will say this about James. This is not like James was a different person to everybody. I know people who are different people to two different people, but
yes,
James was very much, he was just out there. He didn't really care what you thought. He was like love him or leave him kind of deal. So you probably knew a very close version of James than I did too. So, but it's just a different side of the coin, I guess. But so you know what? Before we get into
everybody has a different face that they put on with different people. I think it's just natural.
Oh, of course.
His didn't really deviate that much, like you said. But I know what you mean when you say that we knew different James. That it makes total sense.
Yeah, the different interests. I mean, even interests alone. I mean, I guess if you are someone who you work with and you find out that they're, on a bowling league or something like that, they're going to know different people. They're still going to be the same person, but the bowling buddies are going to be different from the work buddies,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yep.
So that's kind of more like what it would be with James. But James definitely, he didn't deviate too much. Most of the people that knew him the same way. So,
I think the big difference for us is you knew him, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but as far as I know, you knew him pretty young.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he and I met in high school.
I never knew him as a teenager. So that's, there's a big difference there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I saw him go through the different phases of his life, whereas you saw the last couple. Because that's one thing I will say about James. People say that people can't change. James changed. I saw him. He
did.
He went from becoming a priest at one time to plug in his ears and in his tongue and wearing Bad Religion shirts. So yeah, he definitely metamorphosed.
Yeah. But and he also went from a Republican to a pretty progressive liberal.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, he helped.
He did some campaign work for for some Republicans in Michigan, and then at the end there he was pretty liberal.
He was very liberal, and he pretty much, to the point where he was on a first name basis at one time with the Republican governor, because he had done some stuff. Yep. They called him and the guy that he ran with, or that he helped. He was campaign manager of a former candidate, and he won. He basically beat out an incumbent, and they called him the Giant Slayer. So.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's pretty wild about James. But anyway, you know what? James is going to come up numerous times throughout this podcast history, I know. And I want to learn a little bit more about you. You know, I only know of what I heard from James, and what, you and I talked when we went out for cigars and drinks that one night. And of course, that was a good night. That was a great night. I wish we could have had more of those. But again, I was moving, I think, maybe only about a month or two after that, if that.
Yeah, that was your big send-off.
I think it was, yeah, which is interesting.
The thing about those nights, though, because you said you wish there would have been more of them, and I share that feeling as well. But the crux of the issue is, if there is more of them, would you really appreciate them as much?
Maybe not, and that's a good point about life in general.
Yes.
That's totally. So, but I did definitely enjoy that, and just getting to know you more. But so that being said, give me a little bit about your background. I mean, I just knew what I talked to you a little bit at the funeral, and then the
No, I'm here in Michigan, right in the middle of the mitten. I live in Midland, which is the next city over from Saginaw, which is I think, where are you from, or where you lived when you were younger?
When I was younger, yeah, I moved up to Bay City, which is, they call them, for those listening, they call them the Tri-Cities. It's Bay City, Midland, and Saginaw. So
great, and I am. I have to keep in mind that this is not a podcast about James, so
no, yeah, exactly.
Forgive me if I slip on that, but I am a journalist turned investment advisor turned journalist. I got a wife and 3 kids at home.
Excellent.
I don't know what more you want to know. I'm pretty big into politics and law. And that's kind of how I met James. Or keeping in mind, this is not a podcast about James.
You know what? Let's make it about James. That's our commonality right there. Is James? I mean, we don't have to focus on James, but if he comes up, it's that's fine. That's totally fine.
And let's see what else. I don't know what more do you want to know, Tim? Or what more does the audience usually want to know?
I
haven't had any near-death experiences. I wouldn't say I'm young, but I'm not old. I'm kind of right in the middle. I'm old enough to make me think about death on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's normal or not, but I'm also young enough to where, I don't know, maybe I'm not young enough. I like to think I am.
Yeah. When you say you're old enough to think about death, I'm a weirdo. I've thought about death since I've been real little. It's been around me my whole life, so it's kind of not like I fixate on it, but it's always been one of those things that I kind of think about, and that's why I decided to start this podcast. I felt it was time to do something with this topic. I've been toying with it for years, but I guess that was kind of the kick in the ass I needed was to have 3 close people die to me die. So, but
well, is there anything? Is there anything specific you wanted to know about my background or me in general?
Yeah, the journalism. I mean, I know you and James. That's how you met. Journalism.
Yes.
What's interesting is if I remember correctly, you guys did an alternative press to the one. Yeah.
Well, I did, and he kind of joined me later on, and I'm glad he did. He was fantastic. But it really started out because I was at the existing student newspaper in college. And I was managing editor there. And at one point we were hiring columnists, and he applied. And I don't know how many people we interviewed. I think 4 or 5. But we did not end up hiring. I say we because I'm always been embarrassed to say that was a mistake on my part. I should have hired him. But a few months later, I started a new newspaper, and about a year after that, I was looking for some help, and he applied again, and I took him up on the offer, and he was a fantastic addition to the staff. He was very knowledgeable. He was the smartest person I've ever known who didn't have a degree.
Someone who never had a degree.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he had a lot of college credits, but just a smart person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of how the journalism. That's where the journalism comes in.
Excellent.
And the funny thing about the journalism, I recently started a new journalism project, and it's somewhat, I don't know if I want to say it's sad, but I'm certain that James would be involved with this if he was still around. And that's the thing about him dying. It was like, and I know you said this too, or at least agreed with me when I said it. There's only one person that you really want to talk to about all this, and it's James, and he's not here.
And he's not here, and it's frustrating.
It's so ironic. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, I completely agree. I mean, it's what's weird is there are times where I'm building a foundation. I haven't really talked about it much right now. It's more film related, but it's something James and I had talked about years ago, and I want to try and pursue that more. But that's the subject of that is for another episode or something else. But I keep catching myself going, James would be the guy I would ask. Just the other day, I was like, when it comes to nonprofits, when it comes to, he formed so many corporations for us that went nowhere.
He knew all that stuff.
He knew that stuff. It was crazy. Yep. He knew something about pretty much everything. I mean, it was Star Trek. It was, whatever. He knew, and if he didn't know, he was good at bullshitting too.
Well, if he didn't know, he'd come back in a week and he would.
But then he would exactly. He was good at going and doing research. He was basically a walking encyclopedia. So
yes, he really. People are going to wonder why we're reaping so much praise from this guy, but we miss him. So
we do. And let's make some shit up. He solved cold fusion and then just got decided he didn't want to deal with that, so he just threw it out. He didn't tell any of us, but we saw it work in public. But no, what's interesting is I had a dream about him last night, and maybe because we were doing this today, but I don't dream about anybody that's dead. I think I had one dream of my dad in 30-some years,
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it was just kind of weird. But what was really weird was in my dream, I knew he was dead. And it was it was fascinating because I don't remember much about the dream. I was at some kind of like weirdo flea market carnival or something crazy. It was weird. It was like my wife and my son and I were there, and the whole thing was just bizarre. And all of a sudden, I had in my dream, I had this presence that James was there, and all of a sudden, I'm like, you know what, James, just where are you? I know you're here, and he just appeared, and it was just like, holy shit! And I gave him a hug, and it was like, wow, man, it's good to see you. And we talked for a little bit, and then the dream was over.
Like a ghost, or
almost like a ghost, yeah.
Okay.
And it was just, it was just fascinating, because he would peek around the corner, almost like he was messing with me, and then all of a sudden I'm like, come on, James. Sure enough.
Oh, it's got to be interesting for your mind, though, to just have that, and maybe I'm being too sentimental here, but just to have that chance to see him again, that's really cool.
Dude, it was awesome. I woke up and it felt like I had talked to him, But,
right, more closure and...
Exactly. It was almost a chance to say goodbye.
Yeah.
But that's what's interesting, though, is James has come up in the podcast before. I've mentioned him before because... one of the things that happened the night he died, and I will tell people this, and I swear on my dad's grave, and I swear on James's grave, this is a feeling I had. And people, it's very woo-woo, it's very kind of new age type of thing, but my wife and I'd gotten the word in the morning, and we had plans, tickets for a concert, and we went to this concert, and I remember having a conversation with James, in fact, shortly before he died, where he said... it's not that I don't believe in a God. He's like, I just have no proof that there's a God. And it was like, okay, I can understand that, And he said, he's like, it's not that he's an atheist. It's more of an agnostic, as I'm sure with your conversations with James, that's more what he said. And James was the most logical person I've ever known, And I tell people that he was my Spock. I'm my own Kirk.
That's a good one.
He's my Spock, and my other friend who I do these podcasts, he's got another podcast we're doing the network together. He's more my McCoy. He's the damn it, Jim. Whereas James was my Spock. He was the logical one. And the day that he died, we're at this concert, and all of a sudden I got this feeling, this gut feeling, And I call it almost a cosmic text message where James contacted me, is what it felt like, with almost a holy shit, we're all here, everything's fine. And it's kind of like, and maybe it's wishful thinking, maybe it's, truly what happened, but again, this whole purpose of this podcast is we don't know what the hell's going on. You know, there's no proof of what happens when we die. And I could see James being the kind who's like, dead. Because I talked to a guy who was on the other side, and it's a thing called the void. He was like, it's dark. He was conscious of it. And he knew he was somewhere bad because it was very, very angry. And he wanted to get back. He was dead for almost an hour. And it's crazy. It's a crazy story. But it was almost like I sit there and I think about James going into an area like that going, okay, well, it's dark. Logically, I'm dead. I'm going to pass through because what's the point of putting it off? I'm just going to go ahead and go for it and see what happens. And if it's obliteration, then it's obliteration. If it's some kind of afterlife, cool. And I could see him doing that. I could see him wanting to understand what's going on. And sure enough, I got this feeling that he was like, yeah, shit, we're all here. Everybody's here. And it's just...
Now, what do you mean? What do you mean when you say that?
Like there's something... In other words... The feeling I got is that humanity does move on to something else. Okay. In other words, there are people who think there's...
So we as humanity.
We as in humanity, yeah. Okay. And of course from an existential type of feel too, because personally, time is just a construct from humanity that we built. I personally think that all time is going on at all times. Different dimensions, different points of existence. We think in such a linear term, but again, we don't know shit. And that's almost as if like I had a niece, or still have a niece that my brother's died, and I'm like, you know what? He doesn't miss you because in his perspective, you're already there. At least that's one of the theories I believe is that time doesn't exist.
Oh, that's funny you say that. Yes, I agree with that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please.
So, when it comes to that, that gives me a little bit of comfort thinking about James because, by the way, for the listeners, he died in his sleep.
Yes,
as best that we can tell.
Yeah,
and it gives me comfort because in my head I think about perspective, and to me, from his perspective, he's still sleeping. I know you might disagree because you were talking about the messages and stuff.
Well, no, but
from my perspective, from my perspective, thinking about his perspective, he's still he just went to bed.
Yeah,
and that to me that makes me feel better than from his perspective, he's throwing his hands up, waiting to get hit by the semi. To me, him just going to bed gives me more comfort than he's. From his perspective, he has a gun in his face for eternity. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think I know what you're saying. It's he passed on quietly. He passed on.
Yeah, there was no panic or
no
pain or it's just from my perspective. I keep saying the word perspective, but he doesn't know. He didn't know.
Well, and the I don't want to keep bringing up the former guest, but one of the things that happened, and it gives me a theory about this, is I did some research on it after I first talked to him, and then we went into more detail on the episode, but it's a thing called the void, where, there are people who think when you die, your brain shuts off, but there have been so many people, like I said, this guy was dead for almost an hour, and he said it was totally dark, but he was conscious. And there is a theory I have that people who go to that place unknowingly will get stuck or will fight or they don't want to cross over because they don't understand what's going on, and maybe those become are ghosts or whatever because
okay.
But with James, I could see him logically going, well, I did have a weight problem, I did have diabetes, I'm in a dark void, I'm dead. Okay, well, there's clearly something else, because if there's nothing else I wouldn't be experiencing this.
Right.
So I could see him moving.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking the message I got was, and it was about 7-8 hours later after I heard, and who knows how long he's stuck there, but again, time is irrelevant. I mean, he could be there 100 years, and to him it might seem like a minute. So, but
Right.
he just kind of reached out. Maybe he waited for the right time. You know, maybe he contacted me when he knew I would be most receptive because I wasn't thinking about him. You know, and that's the thing that really hit me is it was like I was deep into this concert. I was trying to forget the news I heard because I was like, you know, there's going to be time for that at the funeral. There's going to be time for that over the next year, you know, and it still hits me from time to time, you know. And so it just, that's the other thing that kind of struck me odd is it was like I was not thinking. And then when I did think about it, it wasn't sadness. It was almost bliss because I'm like, wow, that's why I feel like it was something different. But yeah, time is irrelevant. And so he's just sleeping or he's listening to a Bad Religion album right now. You know, I mean, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, if he had headphones on or something, and I'm careful to clarify what I'm saying because when I say from his perspective, all I mean is, I mean, in my opinion, that perspective's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know if it even, you know, jives with what I'm trying to say. But I'm just happy that, you know, from his perspective, he just didn't wake. He hasn't woken up yet.
Yeah,
he's just sleeping.
Yeah, he hasn't woken up yet. Absolutely, because
and the last thing he said to me was a Facebook message. He said, because we were talking and he was, you know, we were getting ready to stop talking. He said, "I'm shutting down for the night."
Oh wow,
that's a direct quote.
That's wild. That's my last words to James. I'm not real happy about. It wasn't bad. We left on good terms. What I'm so glad about is we had an opportunity to have, I refer to it as the one last good time, or one last good old times, because one thing he and I would do all the time is God, this is turning into a James podcast. Anyway, I do want to get into the topic though that you had sent me through email, but
yeah.
So we went riding around and we got something to eat and we we were doing all that kind of stuff, and I think I've even brought this up on episodes in the past, but he and I were sitting there talking, and I had mentioned, you know, how I'm leaving and, you know, I'm getting out of my house and I'm moving away, and I'm not going to buy another house because it won't be paid off by the time I won't be alive by the time it's paid off. And I'm like, I'll be in my 70s. He's like, oh, I'll still be here. And the last words out of my mouth was, not unless you do something about that weight.
I remember you told me that.
Yeah, that was rough, man. You know, and he had only made peace with it that night because we were out eating, and he was like, you know, I'm overweight. And I'm like, yeah, James, I made peace with that myself years ago. You know, and I made light of it, and it really hit me, you know, that afterwards. But I did text him.
I think there were some, you know, other factors there because for a while he was good, and then, you know, things in his life just kind of happened differently and made him, you know, in the shape that he was. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it didn't help that he had that heart condition. You know, I wonder if that wasn't part of it. I can't remember.
Well, I'm sure that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but, you know, the accident and then just the depression, not
Totally.
like clinical depression, but, you know, you don't work for a few months and you're just sitting around and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, but that's what's interesting is the last things that I got from him was a text, because I did text, or, you know, I had a quick, brief text message with him, and he was like, hey, I got my disability approved, and his disability, of course, you know, to be able to go back and get the occupational therapy and all that. And
he was happy.
What's that?
I said, and he was happy about that.
He was very happy about that. And I was like, awesome. And that was the last thing I actually communicated with him. You know, the last words was that, but at least our last communication was on a happier note. So, and he wasn't upset when I said that thing that I said. It's just, it felt shitty because I was like,
I think it's just something that you thought about because obviously hindsight's 20/20, so it's something that you've had time to dwell on.
Totally,
and honestly, he probably just, you know, he probably wouldn't even remember it if you.
Oh yeah,
if he was still alive and you bring it up right now.
Absolutely, he'd be like, yeah, totally. So it's just,
you know, when you dwell on it because of what happened, obviously it's going to, you know, weigh more heavily in your mind.
Absolutely. And honestly, knowing James, he'd probably laugh about it. He'd laugh at the irony of the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So
you would.
So anyway, so you contacted me and you asked me. You mentioned. I don't remember what the terminology was, but I really want to get into this discussion. So we're done. We're done with the date. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, done with the James stuff.
Yeah.
I'll do a nice little segue into it because I want to tell you why I brought it up. Because my beliefs regarding this whole subject are very, I don't want to say boring.
Okay.
Maybe I do want to be boring.
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
they're so physiologically straight laced. I don't believe in anything paranormal, anything extra physical. I am just as straight science as it gets.
Okay.
Which is very depressing because that's a horrifying concept. If you truly think, to me it is, if you truly think about it. So because of that, you search for all these little loopholes. Like, but maybe if this is the answer, then maybe, you can get away from oblivion. You're searching for all these loopholes, and I came across one of them that, and again, I don't really believe in this, but it gives you enough hope to think, well, maybe this is one way of getting out of eternal darkness,
Mm-hmm.
And it's quantum immortality.
Okay, I knew quantum was in the word, and I'm fascinated by my rudimentary knowledge of that.
The basic premise is, there's this quantum physics concept to where nothing can be measured until it's observed.
Yes.
So if they take death if you take death and you're like, well, we want to put death on the quantum level, well, then you really can never die, because in order to measure something, you need to observe it. And if you get hit by a bus, there's going to be this quantum divergent between two realities, and one's going to be you die, and the other's going to be you live. And because of this quantum effect where you can't measure something until you observe it, you literally cannot die. Now, of course, that's ridiculous. To a layman and just like a cursory glance at that theory, it's ridiculous. But you delve deep enough into the Wikipedia article for quantum immortality, and you start, someone like me who doesn't believe in anything, paranormal,
mm-hmm.
you get a little bit of hope. But then, of course, you start thinking of things like, well, wait a second, we live in this particular universe. There's 7.5 billion humans, and none of them are 1,000 years old. So that's got to speak for something. And then you think, well, gosh, what does that mean? Does that mean you're just going to be this big pile of organic material after like 10,000 years? It's ridiculous. Because you try to rationalize it and you realize you can't, so you kind of give up on it.
Well,
but it brings into play a whole bunch of other concepts like parallel universes.
Exactly.
Yeah, all the fun stuff that I know you want to talk about right now.
Totally. Well, but you know what? There's a concept. I watched this video, and my memory sucks, so I don't know if I talked about it to a friend or if I talked about it on a podcast. So I might be repeating myself. I'm sure I'm going to do that a lot through this series. But there was this video I shared out that's called "We Are from the Future," and it basically talks about how photosynthesis. There's a concept of called quantum superposition.
Yes.
So for those listening, basically what it is that a photon of light going down to the surface of a leaf, where basically there are trillions of possibilities for that to happen, so that therefore the one that actually hits the leaf, the rest of them hit another branch, hit another thing. It doesn't have its intended outcome that it wants. The visual they give is, it'd be like people, like, hundreds of people running through a forest, of course in this case trillions, of people running through a forest blindfolded, and the first one to make it through without hitting a tree is the one that becomes the ultimate result, and all the other ones disappear. So in other words, all of the possibilities of us are existing, and the fact that we simply exist means that we are making it to the end, and we are the outcome that is meant to happen.
That's kind of exactly like quantum immortality, yeah.
Totally, exactly. So maybe there is a version of us on another planet that is 1 billion years old. Because we're all the ones that just... Person. What's that?
I said I just don't want to be that person, because then you get into the whole dilemma of you fear death so much, but then you don't realize how the opposite could be just as bad.
Yeah.
When you're a million years old and you're just nothing, you're a pile of, like I said, organic material, or you can't do anything, or there's no relief from existence, which I know that seems ironic, especially with someone who says they're afraid of oblivion, but those two opposites are equally frightening, and I don't know which one nature chose, but it's like there's no middle ground. There's no middle ground of where we're healthy forever and we're enjoying time with everyone we love, and nothing bad will happen. You can't have that.
Well,
nature has to pick one.
And I do agree, and I think from one standpoint at least is I'm reading a book right now where basically it's a bunch of different little mini narratives from the afterlife, and it's fascinating. And one of the stories, each one of us is a different take on the afterlife, and one of them poses this possibility of, if you can live forever, there's no reason to excel. There's no reason to learn. There's no reason to try and better yourself. And so in that regard, I can understand that. That's why, again, we don't, the reason for this podcast is maybe that's where reincarnation comes into place. Maybe when you die, and again, we don't know. The only way we know what happens when we die is when we're dead, because there are items that things in science that we still don't understand. I mean, shit, I've listened to interviews with people and watched videos on YouTube where they reached out into the farthest reaches of space and they found binary code. They can't explain it, Oh, so. Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating, and so it's like we can't just assume, oh no, there's no such thing as reincarnation. Really? Prove it. Just like there's James said. I brought James up again. He didn't not believe in a God. He just couldn't because there was no scientific proof. So.
Oh right, no, I share that with him, because a lot of people will ask me or even tell me, oh, you should believe in a God. You should, it's so much better. And it's like, no, you don't understand. I would love for that to be the case. There's a difference between wanting that to be the case and actually thinking that's the case. I just can't come to grips with thinking that's the case. I'm not saying that I hate God or any version of God.
No, of course not.
That's over the years, but I would love. Trust me, I would take that.
Yeah,
I would take that alternative. I'm just saying, from my observations and plugging those observations into rational, logical conclusions, I can't get there. I wish I could. I just can't. And I kind of, we kind of disagree a little bit, which is fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think we do know, and I think inherently, deep inside, we do know. And the reason why we think we don't, or the reason why some people think we don't, is because, we so greatly fear what we truly know that we try to come up with, these different reasons.
I can see that.
Why do we get so deeply sad when someone dies? Truly, the reason is because we know they're gone. There's no other. You look at all these religions. There's no reason to be sad when someone dies. Even the most gung ho Christians that I know, I don't want to pick on the Christians. The most gung ho religious people that I know, deeply devoted to their faith, they're still sad. There is no reason to be sad at all, especially if you're deeply devoted to your faith, because 99% of the faiths on the earth says that this journey's not our last journey. So why would you be sad? The answer, in my opinion, is because deep down you know what really is going on, and that's why in the pit of your stomach you're upset.
See,
sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your.
No. That's what this is all about. This is this is your episode, but it's. I guess the thing is seriously the thing is that I have to disagree and counterpoint. We'll do the counterpoint type of deal here.
No, go for it, man.
Because, excuse me, I completely understand what you're saying. That it's almost futile to be sad. Because it's a natural point of life, but also it's like it's futile to be sad if you truly believe that there's an afterlife, is what I meant to say. However, if you have a friend who comes to visit and they leave, you're bummed. Well, that's bummed to the nth level because you're never going to see them again in this existence. I think that's why people are sad at a funeral. Speaking from a logical standpoint, sure. From a logical standpoint, you're going to see them in heaven with Jesus, et cetera, et cetera. But they could still be sad because they're not going to see that person in this realm of reality. So to me, go ahead.
I take that. I take what you say there. I want to say that I took that into consideration in my analysis, and I just think that people are so deeply sad, and it's even if you said to somebody, I mean, I'm trying to think of it logically. I'm not trying to dismiss your point, but
no.
You know, you could take my wife for example, and if you were to say to me, you know, you're not going to see her for 50 years, but after that, you're going to spend eternity with her. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not eternity, 1,000 years. So. But you know, yeah, I'd be a little upset. You know, naturally.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be as upset. I wouldn't be as deeply grieving as I would be if she just died. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah,
because
the 50 years is hard to swallow.
Yeah.
But man, the eternity on the other side of that, 50 years is going to go by like nothing.
That'll be nothing. Yeah.
So in my head, I'm thinking that's kind of my reaction to that.
No, I could see that because in a sliding scale, so to speak, 50 years versus eternity, that's nothing. So, and again, I could see that. I guess really what it comes down to is, because believe me, I've tried to do the opposite side of yours, and in other words, not like I'm purposely seeking to prove that there is no God, but I'm trying to sit there and say, okay, well, what would be a logical reason? And the thing that I keep coming back to, and James and I would have these discussions. I'm just going to put, I'm going to say this episode is Mike Westendorf and James. I'm just going to put that in the title. But
no, I'd be honored. But
I will do that. I will do that. But anyway, we would have these conversations, and the big thing that I come back to is if you take it back to the concept of the Big Bang and things of that nature, and there's got to be what put that there. I mean, and here's the thing: everybody has this concept of God as being an old man on a fluffy white cloud,
right.
Et cetera,
but it could be more than that, or it could be different than that. It could be like a cosmological presence that's not like the traditional role of an old man.
Absolutely, we could be some fourth grader science project, but that still doesn't mean he's not or she's not God.
Right.
And there we go in the construct of male and female. For all we know, there's 15 different genders. When it comes to the universe.
There is now, actually.
Yeah, true. But I mean, seriously, in terms of in terms of our concept of that, and people sit there and say, well, why haven't we been visited by aliens? Because for all we know, the dumbest alien is as smart as Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they're not going to bother trying to talk to us.
Yeah. In fact, speaking of him, he does give. I don't know. You've probably heard this lecture before, but he gave a lecture that said, look at the way we look at ants.
Yes.
We observed them. I'm not going to put it as good as he said it, but basically it was like they are not on our level. So there's just some things that we just don't even think about when it comes to them. What are they thinking? Stuff like that.
Totally.
That someone at a higher level than us could be thinking about totally. You got to go just YouTube Neil deGrasse Tyson,
ants,
aliens or something, and
totally
you'll see it. But I completely understand what you're saying, especially when it comes to the origin theories and everything. What I say about that is I don't know, and I'm never going to know it. I'm leaving it up to the scientists. I think one day we'll know, but right now, you and I could throw out all these theories.
Oh, of course,
it's not based on anything other than the movies we've watched and the cartoons that we've watched and what people have said to us. The people that do the experiments professionally and have the billions of dollars of equipment, they're going to figure it out before we do.
Oh, of course. But you know what? Who's to say?
I'm just going to sit back and wait for them to tell me and I know there's some cynics out there who are gonna be like, oh my God, what are you gonna do? You're gonna let some liberal scientists dictate your views. But no, that's just the way I operate. When I go to the doctor, and he gives me an option, I say, no, you're the doctor. You tell me what to do. I don't have the medical degree, so.
But you know what? On the flip side of that, though, people are fallible. I've got a friend who went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, oh, it's just stomach pain. And he went to another doctor, and the doctor said, shit, you got stomach cancer.
Yeah, that is very true.
So you can sit there and you can say, because let's be honest, science is going, and I'm not trying to argue science. I'm fascinated by this stuff. But science is going to try and go from the lowest common denominator of logic. And logic is, there is nothing beyond this. But it's a case of, I've seen too much crazy shit. I've seen too much. I've had some weird stuff happen. I've seen people die from nothing, and then the other person goes through the exact same thing, and they live without a problem. And I'll give you an example. My wife flipped off the I-75 into a ditch upside down, walked out without a scratch, and then you see other people who get in a fender bender and they die. And the reason I bring that up is that I believe that there are other paranormal in a sense. James always said there's no such thing as paranormal. If it exists, it's normal. Okay, fine. But you know what I mean by paranormal. Everybody listening knows what I mean by paranormal. But he's got a good point. But to speak in the paranormal type of terms of, there are checkout points. I believe that maybe we have checkout points, and I've survived some crazy shit. Believe it or not, there's
what do you mean by checkout points?
Checkout points where there's concepts that we are essentially in a big video game, and we're here just kind of living this life and coming down to do the roller coaster, and we get bored. Well, there's a checkout point. You can have that checkout point where you almost got hit by a car. You can have that checkout point where you almost drowned. You can have that checkout point where you had a disease and you could have said, fuck it, I'm going to go through and just let it happen.
Wow.
That's just, again, another concept. And so I sit there and think, okay, well, who wrote that video game? Who wrote this roller coaster ride? I still think, that we are, for all we know, we're in a big giant video arcade. Like there was an episode of Rick and Morty that kind of got on that subject, where they lived on they go and they plug into this video game called Roy, and he lives an entire lifetime. Then all of a sudden he dies and then pulls the headset off, and he's like, holy shit, what the hell happened? And in his mind, he lived that existence. For all we know, we're doing something like that.
Like the Matrix or something.
Like the Matrix, like a simulation, like again, back to the binary.
Those theories are comforting to me because and I say that because for my beliefs are so vanilla that that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
but,
to be able to wake up to that,
Well, just to have any alternative besides what I think would be amazing.
And that's, I guess if anything, just to fantasize about that, to be able to sit and imagine what possible things could happen. But speaking from paranormal,
I think the worst part about my personal theory is that it's not provable. There, like if I'm correct, and I know that's a big if, but there's no like gotcha moment or aha. It's like it's literally it's impossible to even not to tell anybody, but to even realize, what's going on in death. It's just it's it. That's it. And there's no provable anything. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes it. Well, the unfortunate irony of death is we don't know 100% what happens until we're dead. It's like the biggest prank played on people.
Right. Well, but what I'm saying is we don't even know after death.
How do we know?
There's no. Well, I'm saying like my belief is.
Oh, what you're believing?
That there's no like aha, this is death. No, there's none of that. It's just you know what I mean? Just
you just unplug kind of thing. So
right, exactly.
No, and that's again, it's
like I'll give you an example. I passed out a few times in life, and there's been times where I woke up from getting passed out, and there's like all these people around you, and I don't remember going out.
Oh no, I've had that same
that's
feeling.
What it's going to be like.
I
It's
have
just
had
like,
that.
boom. I know
Yeah,
you have, actually. When I was saying that, I'm like, oh, that's happened to him.
with the seizures, totally. And where all of a
Yes,
sudden
yes.
it's like you're sitting there, and usually it happens in my sleep. But who's to say that a seizure isn't something completely different, or not a seizure, but a blackout like that is something different? For all we know,
Right.
that period of time, the reason why James contacted me 8 hours later is maybe that's how long it takes for the brain to finally die. We
Yeah, I
know,
mean,
we've seen that. You see documentaries about severed heads, and the brain
yep,
lives
yep.
for 10 seconds, etc. How do we know that that doesn't live for 2 days?
Yeah, there's like brain activity and wires firing and stuff
Exactly.
like that. Yeah.
So for all we know, we've never been able to track it because we've never been able to really test, because the neurons that are firing are on such a microscopic level that it's kind of like the
Right.
equivalent. I gave this analogy to a friend of mine the other day on a different topic, but it fits in with this here too. Is, for all we know, the planet is 6.5 billion years or 7 billion years old or whatever, or 6,000 for certain listeners. Anyway, but the 7 billion years old, 6 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood. For all we know, they know of five. There's a point to this. They know of five extinction level events that have happened. But for all
Yes.
we know, there were civilizations that lived 30 miles beneath the ground, and we just don't have any proof of them. And people say, well, we can drill 30 miles down and we haven't found anything. Okay, that would be the equivalent of taking a pin, sticking it into a bowling ball, even bigger than that, a pin, and sticking it into a hot air balloon and saying, nope, there's nothing 2 inches down.
Yeah. I get what you're saying.
So for
Yeah.
all we know, there have been so many different civilizations and things like that living, so we only can go so far into the brain. We can only probe so far into the brain. Maybe it's a matter of going down, testing 100% of the brain on such a microscopic sub-quantum level is where the neurons are
Right.
firing, and then they're dead after 10 hours, 8 hours, 2 hours, whatever.
Do you think that we're ever, when I say we, I mean the human race, you think we're ever going to cure death?
I think it is possible with stem cell research, with things of, I've read articles where people are able to slow down the aging process and even reverse the aging process. The only problem with that is I think we could stop the body from dying. I don't think we're going to be able to stop, at least not any foreseeable future. But again, who would have thought we've been able to watch movies on our cell phone?
Right. That's true.
You
But
know?
you mean like you saying that the brain probably has a finite lifespan?
And that's what I'm thinking. The brain.
See,
almost
now
like-
I'm wondering, okay, how do we download it? How do we download that into, a device so that it doesn't die?
Totally. And there's been speculation. In fact, I've seen movies of that. But that is a very valid point, because if you could download the consciousness into something, but then would it really be that person, or would it just be a clone, or would it just be a copy? You can have the Mona Lisa, and you can have a print of the Mona Lisa. Well, which one's more valuable?
That also, that really begs a deeper question of, not only is it just a copy, but what is? Because you said, well, is it really that person? Well, what really is that person?
Good point.
Is it the memories? Is it the collection of cells? I mean, we're getting into some deep stuff here.
Oh yeah, I love this shit.
There is a. Do you know what a Dyson sphere is?
Yeah, I think so. Is that the one that has like various different dimensions on it?
It's a hypothetical object that future humans might be able to create around a star.
Okay.
So what happens is you build enough material, you get all this material, and when I say material, I mean like, bigger than the Earth material, and
Gotcha.
You build a sphere around the sun.
Oh, I was way off then. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I tried to say that gracefully.
No, no, you're dumb, Tim. This is what it is.
Well, and then what happens is you build it to use the energy of the star, because in all directions you're collecting all this energy. It's just this amazing amount of energy.
Gotcha.
Well, there's another level to that, and I hate to keep directing people to Wikipedia, but I forget what it's called. It's called a something computer.
Okay.
And what it is instead of a Dyson sphere, it's like a collection of Dyson spheres. Like, what are those Russian dolls that you open up one and there's another small one?
I know what you're talking about. Totally.
Yeah. So that's what it is. It's just in the middle is a star, and there's a sphere around it, and then at another level there's another sphere, and it's collecting all this energy. So basically, you're utilizing the entire energy of the star, and that's such a great amount of energy that it creates this computer. It creates this computer that has so much energy, and when I mean so much, I mean you're in your head right now. You're underestimating the amount of energy that this thing is.
Yeah, we couldn't
It's
comprehend
literally
it.
Yeah, this computer would be so complex that it'd be like a super quantum computer. Like, you could have like multiple universes inside this computer. And one of the things I was reading was, instead of, everyone thinks that humans are going to go explore, a la Star Trek, which, by the way, I'm a huge Trekkie.
Have you watched, not to deviate too much.
Not original series. I'm a TNG kind of guy.
Absolutely. Did you see Picard, the trailer for that? Just got to say, check it out if you haven't. Okay.
I did, and I cried.
Yeah, dude, it's awesome looking. Okay, enough about that. That's for another day.
I was hysterical. I texted my wife, and she didn't understand. She didn't understand why I was so emotional about it.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
But anyways, you basically, instead of humans turning outward and exploring, they turn inward to a star, and they download their minds into this supercomputer, and they're able to simulate any universe, multiple universes, instead of try to just live in one. Existentially, I don't know. I'm kind of getting away, but you need to read that.
I will definitely check that out.
It's fascinating.
It's called a Dyson sphere.
Well, the Dyson sphere is just the one aspect of it's. What's it called? It's called a something computer around a star.
Got it. If I look up Dyson sphere, I could probably find that.
Yes.
Okay.
Or like Dyson computer or something. But and again, that's another one of these loopholes that I'm looking for. Like, how do I get out of this? And then, of course, just like with the quantum immortality, you start rationalizing. You're like, well, what if an asteroid hits the computer?
And then it's all done.
Yeah, like, would they have the technology to repair it? Would we have slaves working to repair it? Because if we're downloaded into a computer, are there physical slaves out there that are helping us? And then you run into, like, the morality of having people that, because then you get, speaking of Picard, you think like Picard, and you're like, oh, you can't have slave labor, everybody's equal.
Even if it's computers, then you could sit there and wonder, well, what if they become sentient and realize that they're being taken advantage of and destroy the whole thing, the AI, etc. I totally see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But what if those Dyson spheres can be in almost a, or not Dyson spheres, but the computer could be in almost, I can't think of the concept. It's used in Bitcoin, where basically Bitcoin, it is so spread out, more than just like IP.
It's like decentralized.
Yeah, and so it's so spread out. What if there is a series of these computers? And so they're always constantly being backed up, so that if one gets hit by an asteroid...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's that possibility. I mean,
I think if we ever get there, that would be the definition of heaven. Because if you think about it, if you are able to be a part of a computer that has so much computational power, you can literally change universes at will. And what I mean by that is, it's basically like you're dreaming.
Yeah.
And you control it. You control every aspect of it. You can, for all time, you can live every possible outcome in the universe. To me, that's just crazy. Like, I'm walking down the street one day and, okay, so, instantly there's $1 billion in my pocket. Let's go live in this universe where you basically, you're like Bruce Almighty.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is now here's something to say. Who's to say we don't have that? Because I'm going to bring this point up. There's this whole thing, and again, to get a little woo-woo, this is where I'm sure you've heard of the concept of the law of attraction. Believe it or not, kind of thing. Follow it or not kind of thing. There is, like the old Napoleon Hill type of people and all that, from a business standpoint, will say, the more you think of something, the more you'll start attracting it in some regard. Well, and there's that movie, The Secret, which get into it or not. I was fascinated by it at first, and I remember
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, though.
Yeah, I told you. Yeah, so it's like you can't have that car just show up in your living room automatically. So, but it's like, what if we have that ability? We just don't know how. We have that ability.
With the star computer, it's like instant. It's like,
oh yeah, but it would be if we could if we're living theoretically, if we're living in that computer now, and by the mere sense that you thought of it means that from a collective consciousness. See, I love mixing metaphysical and science and woo woo and all that shit together. That blows my mind. So from a collective consciousness, the fact that you were even thinking about it and the other people are thinking about these computers means maybe it exists. And
I'm gonna look up what that's called.
Yeah, I want to know what that computer is. We are taking a break. We're just gonna have you look it up here, but we'll keep talking. But see, this is the root of this whole podcast, is the whole what if. Because I personally can't believe that it just ends. But I'm not saying that that's not a possibility. I don't want to believe that, and you don't want to believe that. Exactly, you're looking for answers. And James said, If that is the thing, and again, I can't, because I've seen too much crazy shit and I've witnessed too much crazy shit and I've come close to death myself. Believe it or not, I had some illness when I was a kid that I shouldn't be walking, I shouldn't be seeing, I shouldn't be talking. Right. My dad stopped visiting me because the doctor said he's not going to make it. So it's like, now I'm not saying that that's reason enough alone, but it's one of the many things, that makes me go, there's got to be something else, there's got to be a reason for just our existence. There's too much perfection in the concept of, how a dog is made from how a gorilla is made to a human to, even smaller things. And people would say, well, that's evolution. Of course it's evolution, but somebody had to guide that. I don't think that can happen by chance. That would be, the fact that we're here would be the equivalence of, I've used this analogy before of taking a dart and throwing it at a dartboard on Jupiter and hitting bullseye 300 times in a row. It's just, there's too much perfectionism. There's too much logic to
you could turn that around someone could turn that around and say, well, there's a reason why we haven't found anybody else, because we're so rare that, that's called the rare Earth hypothesis, which I do subscribe to that theory. I found out what it's called, and it's those Russian dolls. Mm-hmm. They're called Matryoshka dolls.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And this computer thing is called a Matryoshka brain.
How do you spell Matryoshka?
Matryoshka. And if you don't mind, I'll just read briefly.
Yeah, please do.
The first paragraph. It says, it's a hypothetical megastructure first proposed by Robert Bradbury based on the Dyson sphere of immense computational capacity. It is an example of a Class B stellar engine employing the entire energy output of a star to drive computer systems. And it derives its name from the nesting Russian Matryoshka dolls. And basically, and I'll be real brief here, I won't hijack the podcast.
No, this is good.
The concept of the brain comes from the idea of using Dyson spheres to power an enormous star-sized computer. The innermost Dyson sphere of the Matryoshka brain would draw energy directly from the star it surrounds and give off large amount of waste heat while computing at a high temperature. And then the next sphere would absorb the waste heat and then use it for its computational purposes while giving off waste heat of its own. This heat would be absorbed by the next sphere and so on, with each sphere giving off less heat than the one before it. Let's see. And then lastly, some possible uses of an immense computational resource have been proposed. One idea is to use it to run perfect simulations or uploads of human minds into virtual reality spaces supported by the structure. And this one guy went even so far as to suggest that a sufficiently powerful species utilizing enough raw processing power could launch attacks upon and manipulate the structure of the universe itself. It could allow simulating entire alternate universes. And that's, to me, that's just fascinating.
That is fascinating. That's some pretty wild stuff. I love when you can mix, quantum metaphysics with existentialism into something like
Yes.
that, where, that blows my mind. That stuff blows my mind. But getting back to that whole rare earth thing,
Yes.
I know what you're saying. I'm familiar with the concept that it's rare, but here's the thing.
It's like the Fermi paradox. It's the opposite of the Fermi paradox.
I guess I'm not familiar with that one. Which one is that?
Fermi paradox basically says that mathematically it'd be almost impossible that we're alone in the universe.
Exactly, but just the name rare earth would imply it doesn't say only earth. It says rare
Right.
earth. So
Right.
rare, I would say from a concept of rare, sure. If there are billions of galaxies, and within each of those galaxies is billions of planets and solar systems and things of that nature, we're talking, for all intents and purposes, a Google of planets,
Yeah.
or of solar structures. There might be one with 1,000 zeros, and that's how many planets have life, and that would still be billions. The numbers
Right.
are astronomical. So based upon that, there still has to be, again, it comes back to that concept, there still has to be somebody who constructed all this.
Right. That's kind of the opposite of the rare earth hypothesis is, just mathematically it's so large that there's got to be.
There has
And
to
then,
be.
of course, then you can rationalize that and say, well, yeah, maybe, but the universe is so big, they're so far away, and then you have the expanding universe, and there's no way they're going to reach each other anyway. So, like one example is the galaxies are redshifting, which means they're moving away from each other. And pretty soon, I shouldn't say pretty soon, within like a billion years or something, everybody in the Milky Way is not going to be able to see any other galaxy. They'll just, if they don't have our history books, they're just going to, or our science books, they're just going to think that they're in this floating island, which is what we actually thought back in the 1800s. They're not going to have any concept of other galaxies, kind of circling back to what we originally were talking about, when it comes to perspective.
Oh yeah,
But I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think you were going to say something.
No, basically it's that whole, mathematically infinite of possibilities that there's,
Right.
It really, I guess the thing is it all still comes back to the one thing that holds every one of these episodes together is the fact that we won't know until it happens to us. And it's going to happen to everybody. It happens.
Remember, I think that you won't even know after it happens.
And that's exactly, that is, well, and here's the thing is you could look at that from several ways. You don't know what happens because you come back, or you don't know what happens because you're in another place, or you're in a place that's so similar to this that you didn't even notice that it happened.
One thing I really want is I would like a replay. Can you give me a redo, but have me keep the knowledge?
Oh yeah, that would be awesome to be born with all this stuff.
Course, again, you try to rationalize it, and then you think, well, wait a second. If that was actually the case, this would have to be the first run because I don't know shit about tomorrow. So
true. That's otherwise, you would know everything.
If you do get a replay, this is my first run.
Or maybe that's the way the program is designed is you don't get to remember it and you just kind of go through and do it different ways. Again, going back to that whole photosynthesis,
which to me is just as tragic as having nothing be there in the first place. Because if you don't remember, then it just doesn't matter. In my opinion,
the thing is though is that I've heard different theories on that whole concept of where you go back to, they call it source energy, because we are all energy and matter and protons, etc.
Right.
And you go back to source energy, and the analogy that was given to me by my wife years ago, because I had the same kind of thing, and it was like, yeah, but what's the point if you go back to source energy? And she says, yeah, but you still keep the essence of what you are, of the your spirit, so to speak, but you might lose the ego. You might lose the individuality.
Maybe that's like how you have deja vu moments or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. It's the way she put it was, you could be a drop of rain, but you could then become part of the puddle and then go back to the ocean. And so we might forget that stuff because who knows how many times we've come around, or maybe this is a one time and one and done, but you lose that when you go back to source, but you don't know that you are not part of that and not part of this, because at that point it doesn't matter. Just like your tastes change. When you're a kid, Brussels sprouts are disgusting, but you forget about that when you're older and you like Brussels sprouts or whatever, asparagus, Where when you're on that other plane of existence, all this is irrelevant. We think in such a linear term. We think in such a three-dimensional being living in a four-dimensional world that's all we are able to grasp. For all we know, there is an ecstasy that we don't even know, and it becomes part of, something like the Dyson sphere or whatever,
Well, it's like what you were just saying. It's sort of like ants on the Mobius strip, where I don't know if you know what a Mobius strip is.
Yes, exactly.
But they don't know. They're just walking around this surface, and they don't know that it's all connected and weird, and it's just another dimension that they're not aware of.
In fact, it's interesting that you mentioned Mobius strip, because somebody drew one of those on our dry erase board at work for some reason. So just the other day too. So that's kind of ironic, but or coincidental, I should say. It's that's that. I could talk about this shit for hours. I know, this
right?
stuff. I really love this stuff, but we should wrap it up. And I'll tell you what, Mike. Maybe we could continue this at another point, either in person or even on another episode. But definitely keep in touch. You got my number. At least I think you do. I know when I typed in yours, it popped up with your name. So let's keep
when you
in
called
contact.
your name popped up. So
well, you had me going when you were like, "Hey, I'm doing good. Who is this?" So. But I appreciate you talking with me, man.
Hey, no problem.
I definitely this is good stuff. It was nice to be able to reminisce about James from almost like it felt like we had 80% in common, but there was that 20% that was different about what we knew of him, and we could go on that for hours, I'm sure. But
right.
So thank you, Mike. Thank you, James, for joining me on this episode. I'll talk to you later, man.
Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good night.
Hey, you too. Bye.
Bye.
And that was my conversation with Mike Westendorf. And, I was thinking about this. I forgot. I went out with him one time for drinks and cigars shortly after the funeral. So I do know him a little bit better than I thought. But again, my memory's that of a starfish. So anyway, if you want to learn more about his newspaper, you can check it out at chemicalcitypaper.com. I definitely recommend checking into it and get to know a little bit about that city he lives in. So, in the meantime, have yourself a good day, have yourself a good life, all that kind of stuff. But you know what? Reach out to that friend. Make their life and their day a little better, too. Take care of yourselves.